everybody's talking about Tennessee's defensive line and how it could give Ohio State trouble. But the one time they played a team this level of talent, this caliber, on the offensive line was Georgia, and the defensive line got no pressure all game. So are we sure the defensive line will be able to get the same level of pressure on Ohio State? Or have they just been cashing in on some really mediocre offenses this year who they've played?
Well, I think that's a fair point. I think, though, the difference is Georgia's offensive line. Georgia got guys back from injury for that game. They were better in that game against Tennessee than they had been. I think Georgia has a good offensive line. You saw it able to run the ball against a good Texas front in the second half of the SEC championship game. Ohio State losing its center, Seth McLaughlin, was a strong All-American candidate, and lost him before the Michigan game. I thought that was I think that's a big factor in this game. It also lost its starting left tackle, Josh Simmons. It's lost two key offensive linemen. And I know Ohio State has a lot of talent, and I'm sure it's not bringing in some stiff to fill that position, but it's still not at its best. And I think Georgia's offensive line, when it played Tennessee, was in much better shape than Ohio State's is. I think Tennessee defensive front is going to – I think it's going to outplay Ohio State's offensive line. And if it doesn't, then Tennessee has no chance. You can forget about it. It's going to lose by 2 touchdowns.
It's crazy to think that this defensive line could be the reason that Tennessee gets their first playoff win, or it could be the biggest bill of goods ever sold to a Tennessee fan base in the history of man. When you look at what they actually have been described as, I'm not talking about spring practice where Kirsten Biggers has 200 yards against the scout team defense. I'm talking about they've actually done things during the season, but the schedule has been so bad, we're not 100% sure how great it is. So you could have this upcoming game, Tennessee's defensive line could define it one of two ways. They could be incredibly overrated, or they could define it as they go out there and win the football game, John.
Yeah, well, it has played. You go back, kind of its coming out party, because the first 3 games, everybody knew those were just overmatched teams. NC State was overrated and overmatched. Oklahoma, that was the game where Tennessee's defensive front looked so dominant when it's bringing in its 10th and 11th defensive linemen, and they're making plays in the Oklahoma backfield. But we know that Oklahoma team its offense was bad all year, and it was at its absolute worst for that game because of injuries and so forth. Didn't know what to do with its quarterbacks, and that's a story for another day. But we look at, when you go through Tennessee's schedule, who would you say who had the most dynamic offense of all of Tennessee's opponents? Who would you say?
I mean, I would have to say it was Georgia. But...
yeah, you'd have to.
Yeah, but do you really think of that as a dynamic offense?
No, John, but it's funny.
Like it's a solid offense.
Yeah, I would have looked preseason as who's going to carry the banner for electric offense in the SEC. You would have said Tennessee, Ole Miss, and then Ole Miss.
Even with Jackson.
What?
Ole Miss, Texas, LSU.
Yeah, they all kind of slipped short, in my opinion.
Well, Ole Miss put up a lot of yards. Tennessee didn't play the best offensive teams in the SEC.
Agreed.
No, I mean, statistically, and again, this is just statistically speaking, Alabama's offense was pretty good, but you're right. When they faced Tennessee and Oklahoma, they got, I hate to use the word exposed because everybody says that when someone gets beat, but that was a classic case of getting exposed. It's, if you have a good defensive front and you run stunts and twists, Jalen Milroe is completely lost in the pocket and doesn't know what to do.
But the other factor, when you look at it from the other side, if you watch Tennessee's defensive front, it looks really good. I mean, you've got a bunch of 300-pound guys who can who can move and who can make some plays downfield. I mean, that's what got my attention with this defensive front. And James Pierce is a high draft pick, and he's not. Joshua Joseph's a really good pass rusher. Amari Thomas, these are proven guys. So I don't think, even though even though Tennessee hasn't faced a really dynamic, it hadn't faced Oregon with a lot of weapons and a really polished quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. It hasn't faced that kind of team, but if it played Texas, say Texas has offensive talent, good offensive line, I still take Tennessee. I would bet on Tennessee's defense against Texas.
So, John, do you think, because I know you've been critical of Tennessee not blitzing against Georgia, and I understand that. I thought they should have blitzed more. Do you think they'll have to blitz some against Ohio State, or do you think they'll be able to just win this game with their front four?
Oh, I think they need to blitz. I don't think it's like I have to. I think you should want to blitz, because I think if your defensive front can pressure a quarterback some, well, you mix it up. I just think the main thing you don't want to get predictable against good teams. Never get predictable. So I would mix in blitzes. If an offensive line is having trouble blocking a front four, then I want to bring even more pressure sometimes, because it's like then they feel overwhelmed. They're already struggling to beat the front four to keep it away from its quarterback, and now you're bringing more guys. I think that works. I think Tennessee really needs to mix it up, but I do believe it's going to blitz. It's got to. It can't. I mean, the Georgia defensive game plan made no sense to me.
Raise your hand if you're about to sound like an old fuddy-duddy. Tennessee does have to do things and still be sound defensively, John. And I don't think they have to take chances like they used to. Frankly, I think they'll win more battles in one-on-one talent matchups than they would have 2 years ago. So why take the risk? The odds are in your favor.
Yeah, because it's like when one thing is offensively, something is really working for you. If the other team can't stop the run and it's doing everything it can and still struggling to stop the run, and you catch it being so run conscious and throw on it, you can get big plays. I think Tennessee can make big plays defensively by blitzing.
Well,
I just wouldn't sit pat. I stand pat with it and say, okay, our front four is really good. We can contain Ohio State with this. But Tennessee has a really good cornerback to match up against Ohio State's best receiver. So, yeah, I think in these kind of games, you have to take chances. You have to be aggressive.
Okay, now I'm going to play the other side of this beforehand so that people can roll it back, keep your receipts. If it's after the game, then I'm wrong. But the one thing you don't want to walk away when we talk about this defensive front, you don't want to walk away and say at midnight in Columbus is, let Jeremiah Thielander beat us. That's the one thing you don't want to say, because I think he's been a significant dip in the production of the middle linebacker position since Keenan Pili went out in the Florida game. And if you're talking about putting more pressure on each individual in the defensive front, John, you could be putting him in a greater risk-reward role. That scares me.
Okay, well that's fair, but I think there's some rewards to be had here. I just feel like when an offensive line and an offense feels it's under siege and it's really having a hard time dealing with that front group, and then you mix in blitzes, I just think it gets overwhelmed, and I think there's it really impacts morale in your psyche when you just feel like we can't handle this. And go back, I know it was Oklahoma had a bad offense, but that's how Oklahoma looked. Tennessee blitzed some in that game, and it was effective too, because Oklahoma just felt overwhelmed. And so, yeah, I would be willing to take that risk. So you sit there, Dave, and you just stand pat. And, when you walk away from the game, well, I was true to my philosophy.
Yeah,
you live with that until next season.
Feel pretty good about it. That analyst want to take him out for a big steak. We can celebrate a loss as long as we use analytics.
Well, just so you guys know, a bit of a history lesson here.
Here we go.
Last time Tennessee had a defensive front this great, they were also playing for a chance to go to the Rose Bowl. and that would have been 2001. And of course, on the way to go to the Rose Bowl, the starting quarterback for their opponent got hurt, and they apparently had not prepared for the quarterback draw with the best interior defensive line in history
ever.
And lost and let Matt Mock beat them, running it up, just taking the snap and running it up the middle.
I still remember that's the only SEC championship game that I've been to where they did this. They go, just want to let everybody know at halftime there, Rohan Davey is out, quarterback LSU, and yeah, we were on a plane, by the way. And then he said, who was it Brandon Tofield? Who was the running back?
Yep.
The running back was out, and I forgot the guy that came in for him, Dominic Davis. Yeah, he played really well too.
Yeah, they both look like clones of the previous dude, but it's my fault because I'm the one that booked the trip to the Rose Bowl.
How inexplicable is that loss, though? How do you? They had John Henderson and Howard Haynesworth and let Matt Mock run on him.
Well, here's the thing: it was as though you're playing on a sandlot. Does anybody ever play on a sandlot anymore? Is there even any such thing as let's go to the sandlot field? And everybody goes, what? The sandlot? Okay. But it was as though they thought Matt Mock could not cross the line of scrimmage. He had to stay back behind the line. He wasn't eligible to advance the ball beyond the line of scrimmage.
John's getting so excited about this game. He's knocking his microphone around.
Well, this microphone is very flexible and very mobile, so that's sometimes helpful, sometimes not. So yeah, it was just that was all LSU had.
That was all they had. He did not throw the ball well that day.
No, and Tennessee just stood back and watched it happen. Yeah, that was one of the toughest games, I think, to figure of Tennessee's, of its worst moments and of its really bad games. And you think, well, the South Carolina game to me tops them all in 22, but that 2001 SEC championship game, Tennessee. So why are we talking about that, by the way? I forgot. How do we get into that? Because
we're talking about defensive fronts, elite defensive fronts for Tennessee playing in a game with a chance to go to the Rose Bowl. Because if they win this game, they'll go to the Rose Bowl.